I call the September 10, 2019 work session meeting of the Portsmouth City Council to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Glover?
Here.
Mrs. Burke? Here. Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons? Here. Mayor Rowe?
Here. I ask everybody in the room, to include myself, to make sure that your phones are silenced, and if you need to talk, please go out into the hallway to talk. With that, let's get into the agenda. Dr. Patton?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council. The first presentation this evening, Mr. Brian Birnbaum, CFA, a Senior Vice President at Greystone Consulting, which is the investment advisor for the City of Portsmouth's Retirement Board. Mr. Birnbaum will present information on the Greystone's history with the city, the pension investment portfolio restructuring, and historical fund performance. The second presentation this evening, City Attorney Solomon H. Ashby is returning at your request to brief you on the structure of the procurement laws in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Mr. Birnbaum.
Mr. Mayor, Dr. Patton, members of the City Council, staff, and public, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I prepared a short presentation of about a little less than 10 slides. I'm going to talk about my background and the background of my firm. As Dr. Patton talked about, the history of the relationship that we've had with the City of Portsmouth Retirement Board, talk about some changes that we've made to the pension plan over the last couple of years, and then finally we'll talk about performance. I will keep my comments brief because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, which I'll be happy to address. On the second slide here, this is my background. I've been in the investments business for 25 years. And I've worked primarily in advising public retirement systems on structuring, monitoring, and reporting on their investment portfolio. I joined Greystone in 2016. I am the lead consultant to this city's pension funds, as well as a number of other public retirement systems, insurance companies. And prior to my involvement with Greystone, I was the head of public fund consulting for an organization called Mercer Investments. Mercer Investments is the largest investment consulting firm in the world, and I oversaw their practice of advising public retirement systems across the country on matters related to their investment programs. In addition to that, I list a number of, or a couple of other roles that I've had over my 25-year career. I just wanted to mention a few of the clients that I've worked with in the past, so it hopefully give you some comfort and context of some of the practices around what other public funds are doing, which we can get into later. But I've worked with the state of Florida, states of Colorado, Nebraska, Ohio, Wisconsin, and you're probably wondering what the relevance to all of that is. And I think number one, I'm able to share best practices of what other funds are doing. But importantly, the challenges that the City of Portsmouth is facing with respect to the public retirement system is not unique around the country. And so I can share some of those observations as well. Who is Greystone? Greystone is the institutional consulting arm of Morgan Stanley. It works with pension funds, endowments, foundations, insurance companies, family offices. We were formed in 1973. So there's a rich history within the organization of providing advice to institutional investors around the country. When we talk about advice in what we do. We recommend strategies for our clients with respect to how they allocate their assets, who to hire to implement that strategy. We help them developing investment policy statements and risk controls and understanding what risks they are taking within their investment programs, and then ongoing reporting of those results.
To this in here.
There's a lot of potential conflicts that exist in my industry. I can tell you that we don't have any of them. Every recommendation we provide, not only to the City of Portsmouth, but to all of our other institutional clients, is based solely on the merits of that advice. And what I mean by that, we don't have any incentive to recommend Morgan Stanley products. We don't have any incentive to recommend any investment manager's products relative to the other. And the reason for that is, and the way that is that the only fee that we receive comes from the fees that our clients pay us to provide that advice. So we are a fiduciary to our clients, and we always have been. Greystone Consulting, this is a relatively recent number, certainly within the last 12 months. Advises on over $300 billion in client assets. And if we looked at the assets of public funds, municipalities, and statewide systems, we advise $22 billion in public retirement system assets. I put a logo down here, something called the Greenwich Associates Quality Leader for 2018. This is an independent organization that surveys how satisfied institutional investors are with the services that they're getting from their investment advisor. In 2018, we're happy to say that we won the Quality Leader Award for mid-sized consulting firms. Now let's talk about the City of Portsmouth and the relationship we've had together in our shared history. Back in 2012, the City of Portsmouth hired an investment manager. And that investment manager, the cheapest way to access that manager was by accessing it through a firm called Credit Suisse. At that time, back in 2012, the team that I'm with was employed at Credit Suisse. So what we did was we simply reported on the performance of that single manager to the retirement board. We had no other responsibility with respect to asset allocation or any investment strategy that was being implemented at the time. In 2016, the team that I'm with, which is about 15 people strong, moved from Credit Suisse to Greystone. When we moved over to Greystone, we began working with the retirement board and then the city CFO as they asked us to take on a greater level of responsibility, not solely reporting on a single manager's performance, but taking a greater responsibility for helping the city and the retirement board allocate its assets effectively. So we went from this very narrow mandate to a much more broader mandate, and that started to happen in the middle of 2017. And that's what we say in this bullet point here, that we took on a more sort of holistic and robust role with the retirement board in the middle of 2017. And the way our relationship worked back then was we would provide advice to the retirement board. If we thought an investment idea was a good one and a compelling one, we would bring it to the board, we would give them the rationale for that investment strategy, and they would either say, yes, go ahead and do it, or no, don't do it. That's fairly typical of relationships between public retirement systems and their consultants. We provide advice, and our clients either take it or they don't take it. Increasingly, there is a move in the industry towards what's called discretionary mandates. And in 2018, the City of Portsmouth issued an RFP for a discretionary investment advisor. We responded to that RFP, and we were awarded that mandate. So our relationship changed. I'll describe what a discretionary mandate is in a second. But our relationship changed from the early days in 2012 to just reporting on results of one manager, to in 2017, where we took on a more high-level role in helping the retirement board across the entire portfolio, to one where we are now the discretionary investment manager for the city's retirement system, and that was effective October 31st of last year. So there's a big difference between discretionary and non-discretionary advisors. Discretionary advisors have the ability to implement on behalf of its clients without getting prior approval. Now that may sound scary, but let me assure you that the retirement board maintains discretion and authority to approve its investment policy statement. The investment policy statement is a lengthy document. I think it's about 12 pages long. In it, it identifies what we can, what we can't do, what the risks are that we are to avoid. But within the construct of that investment policy statement, we now have the ability to implement on behalf of the city's pension fund. So we don't need the board's prior approval if we want to terminate a manager and hire a new one. We can do that without getting approval. We report back to the retirement board on any changes we made. We certainly report on performance. We have a meeting with the board on Thursday morning. But that's an important distinction between how consultants work with their advisor under a non-discretionary model, providing advice, under a discretionary model, being able to act without prior approval. So I'm going to go back again to the point at which we were asked by the retirement board and the city CFO to take on a greater level of responsibility with the city's retirement system. I show a graph on the left-hand side of this slide, which takes a look at what the targets were to the broad asset categories prior to our greater role and level of responsibility, and where we are today. So we made some pretty significant changes during 2017. We reduced our non-US equity exposure, we reduced our fixed income exposure, and we increased our non-US equity exposure. There was a lot of discussion and debate around why we thought that was a good idea. In the interest of time, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. But suffice it to say, our main rationale for our change in strategy is we wanted to increase diversification. We wanted to increase the opportunities for us to generate the kinds of returns that we need to provide the secure retirement to our beneficiaries. On the right-hand side of the slide, there's a lot of changes that occurred underneath these broad asset categories. I talked about improving diversification. The bonds that we had in our portfolio prior to our involvement were not really bonds that provide strong levels of diversification, particularly when equity markets are weak. So we sold out of a lot of the bonds we owned back then and bought bonds that we think are going to serve us better during times of equity market weakness. Greater use of passive management. There's a big debate in our industry about whether managers, investment managers, can actually generate returns that beat the overall market. We think in some areas they can, in other areas they can't, and so we increased passive investment in those areas that we don't think is fruitful for active managers. We eliminated style biases. That adds to risk without an expectation of return. We used a number of specialist managers. We moved into other areas that we didn't have exposure to. When all was said and done, with all the changes that we made, and they were fairly significant, we were able to improve diversification, improve the return potential of our portfolio, while at the same time reducing cost from 0.6% of assets to 0.48%. Now let's talk about performance. There's two ways we're looking at performance here on this slide. On the top on the top table, we look at the returns for the plan year of the pension fund. So the pension fund's plan year is the 12-month period that ends June 30 of every calendar year. So we go back to 2013. The way to look at that number for 2013 is our return of 12.0% was the one-year return ending June 30 of 2013. You could see some years are better than others, driven largely by what the capital markets provide us. And I denote in the 2017 year that it's actually the end of that year that we started taking on greater levels of responsibility. The returns at the bottom of the page are the cumulative annualized returns, so stepping away from plan years and focusing more on time, irrespective of plan years. So these are the results ending June 30 of this year. So these are pretty current. For the last 3 years, our return has been 7.6%. For the last 5 years, a little under 5%. And for the 7 years, since we've worked in some capacity with the city, again, in those early years, just a single manager reporting on performance, 7.2%.
Good.
There is a benchmark that we compare our results to, and we show that here. And in all cases, the returns that the City of Portsmouth pension funds have earned have been in excess of what the capital markets provided as representative of that custom benchmark. Lastly, I think it's also important to look at the performance since the current relationship. I talked about our relationship evolving to where we're now the discretionary investment manager. That relationship became effective on October 31st of 2018. The return since then through June 30 of this year, net of all fees, has been 11.5% versus our benchmark of 9.7%, so a difference of almost 2 percentage points. So the returns that we've earned and that the city's earned, while they vary in any plan year based on what the markets provide, over a long period of time, we've beaten the benchmark and we've exceeded the actuarial return assumption that impacts the value of our liabilities. So with that, I will stop there. I'm happy to address any questions.
Questions?
Yes.
Lisa?
I have one. Thank you, sir, for the report. Good information, but just helping me to understand a little better in the historical plan performance years in 2015 and 18. Was that the market, or was it some other cause that caused those to be lower, or so significantly lower?
So in 2015, just to give you a sense, I jotted this down before I came in. The U.S. equity market for the 12 months ending June 30 of 15, which would be embedded in that 0.2% number, was right around 7%. So we have about 70% of our assets in equities. We have about 30% in bonds. So that's, I don't recall what the bond market did back then, but the equity markets didn't even provide a 7.25% return during that plan year. That's why it's really challenging to look at individual plan years. I know 12 months seems like a long time sometimes, but in the world of investments and strategies, you really need a long-term horizon to see how things play out. And by long-term horizon, we really, 5, 10, 20-year kinds of time frames. Yes.
And Mr. Birnbaum, the actuarial return benchmark is about 7.25 or
Correct.
somewhere around there?
Yes.
Okay.
Paul?
So you're saying to us, that in theory, we carried 7.2% since 2013, but in actual real money, we've lost 10, 11%.
Yep.
So this is the illusion, and the real money of where we stand is the truth, right? Okay.
Let's talk about the dynamic that's at play in the fire and police and the supplemental retirement systems. And this is data as of the plan year 2018. So 2019, the actuarial valuation is not final, but the numbers are going to be roughly the same. The city contributed about $9.3 million to both plans in the plan year 2018. We paid out almost $31 million in benefits. The difference between those two numbers is $21.5 million. That means we used the trust fund assets to the tune of $21.5 million to meet the benefit payments that we promised our employees. So I would agree with you that the market value of the portfolio has declined, and the market value of the portfolio has declined not because of the investment results, but because we're spending $20 million a year in excess of the contributions that comes in, and that needs to come from the investment portfolio. That represents about 10 or 11% of the balance of the assets. So it's this, the investment returns help because we pay benefits from two sources: the investment returns we earn and the cash contributions that come in.
And go over those numbers again, 9.3.
9.3 and, I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
$9.3 million was the contribution, 30.8 million were the benefit payments. Difference between the two is 21.5. Right now, we have assets of about $210 million, so that's where we get to about 10 or 11%
Right.
of the value of the fund.
Right, and I was right.
let's-
Saying 31,
I
saying
said
20.
31, honey. Why don't you tell me no?
So we're not being nimble enough. Confused because at the onset, the first thing you know is your expenditures. And we should have known what we were paying out. And we need to know what we're paying out and make the most accurate projections we can. And we have some good years, but the bad years just killed the good years. So the good years aren't as good or aren't as true, but the bad years are true blue.
Well, we do know each year how much we're going to pay out.
Yes.
I mean, that's
we know
not a
that.
mystery.
No.
It's not. That is a forecast that's developed by the actuary that
That's right.
reports to the retirement board
That's
and to
right.
the city council, I believe, about and how much we pay out, what the value of our portfolio is. All of that goes into determining what the cash contribution to the retirement system
We're
is.
making money on our investment,
Yes.
No question.
but the amount of the fund is
Yep.
decreasing because we're paying benefits out of the fund. We're
That's
eating
right.
Correct.
seed corn.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay.
We're not, in reality, making money
We are.
unless we meet our obligations. And when you tell me, rather than let him answer it,
No, that was a question to him, Paul. I'm not talking.
well, I was talking to him and asking him a question.
I'm sorry, I thought
Mr.
you-
Mayor, you answered it.
I was asking.
And you should stop trying to answer things for other people.
Paul, I was asking a question for me.
Well, I
thought you
was the
had.
one talking to him.
I thought you had finished. I apologize. Okay? Okay?
Yes, sir. You know I forgive you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. My question was not an answer to you, but a question to him.
But I was asking a question, waiting for a response, and this is done kind of frequently. So kind of, look out for your constituents.
Please ask your question.
Sir, all I can say to you is this. I count real money. You're an investor. I know we went from 78, 79% to what folks say is 67%. Now, whether that's a theory or whether they are factual figures, what I'm saying is regardless to this, we should never have erred that far, that long. You see what I'm saying? There have been some excellent opportunities in the market. I understand there's a number of parameters involved here. I understand you just bring it to the board and say, well, this is a good investment. And I'm wondering, do you have debate about that? Do they know what they're doing? You see what I'm saying? But all that's in the game, in the parameter. My bottom line is I do not, emphatically do not want us to lose money. And when we lose money, for whatever the reason is, we got a problem, terrible problem.
One of the things, Mr. Birnbaum, that I've shared with council since 2018, when the actuarials changed, and they will continue to change, and they will continue to increase. We will know the exact about actuaries, which are right now at 9 point, whatever you said, million. Next year, they will probably be at 10 point something million dollars. That is money that we have to pay by federal law. At the same time, with our payout of the retirement, it is always going to be more than any investment fund can bring in. An investment fund is not going to bring into any municipal entity $31 million a year in investment. So right now we're working with Greystone and taking us from October of 2018 to where we are now. There has been a significant gain. And both our liaison on the retirement board and Mrs. Spivey and Mr. Ashby and Mrs. Gooden, who are on that board with your liaison, we are moving in the right direction.
We are.
The actuarials, although the federal agency set that, they could change it at any time and increase it even more. But one of the things we will always have to do is meet the amount of whatever the actuarials are based on the people who are in our retirement system.
What's our amount again? The amount of the total fund?
It's about 210 million.
210, we're taking out 31.
I see your hand.
And this is why I'm saying we have to be nimble and we have to be quick. If the actuary is a peekaboo situation, that means that we don't know when it's coming.
We know when it's coming.
Oh, well, if we know when it's coming, we can prepare. We can estimate what it's going to be, and we can be in the ballpark at all times. All I want to do is make this money, and we can make $31 million in the market in a year. With the funds that we are investing, we can. And he should be the first to have corrected you on that.
You can speak.
It is possible.
In some years, it is. In some years, the equity markets go up 20 and 30%.
Well, just 3 weeks ago, the number was 22 million when we were in a meeting.
It was. Last year,
Now
our
it's
returns were.
31. So, see, I know the math is wonderful and everybody loves the figures and the figures can point to anything and help anybody if you believe in the figures. But I'm looking at this money and the reality. And I don't care what those figures are, we need to make that money. And we, like 2 weeks ago, the same person that just said 31 told us 22. So, am I right, sir? No, I was talking to.
You're asking for the floor. Please.
Okay. I think, based on the discussion, I just think that we're getting a little bit off track here. And Councilman Battle, you absolutely are correct. You know, we can always do better. I don't disagree with that.
But did we have 22?
I think the returns last year were somewhere in the, last week when we met, I think,
In our meeting, was it 22?
it was close to that. The returns were significant. That was the one-year returns, and Ms. Spivey probably has that information. But in any event,
Saying is,
hold on, brother. In any event, I think what you're saying, to your point, investments are such that they're going to be good years and bad years. We've seen some pretty good years, and I think it's trending in that way. But that's not the only thing that we have to be on the hook for in terms of meeting the obligation. And I think that's where you're going, so.
Check my math. In order, let's take 2019, in order to have that return of 7.8%, our endowment, I'll call it an endowment, would have to be $397 million.
To get $30 million.
That's right. So that nobody pays anything. It doesn't come out of the, it doesn't come out of the retirement.
Right.
Nor does it come out of the city contribution.
Right.
The difference between 210 and 397 is $187 million. And so if we wanted to skate free and not put any money up the 9.3 or eat our seed corn, then we'd have to increase the endowment by a huge amount, $187 million. Correct.
And that, if I may, Mr. Mayor, and that does not address the fact that the actuaries can only project.
Right.
And they use assumptions.
Right.
But we know people's life expectancies are getting longer, people are living longer, and to the extent that they're in our retirement system and taking benefits longer than we expect, we might even find out if we had the $185 million contribution, it still wouldn't be enough 50 years down the road.
But the logic is sound.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Paul?
there was a baseball player, and he had an average of 200. And the guys in AAA had an average of 350. And the coach did everything he could to get this guy to bring his batting average up. And every time they would communicate, he would give the coaches excuses why he wasn't there. And the coaches were very tolerant, did that year after year after year. And then one year, they just decided that they had to go in a new direction because they wanted to emphatically get someone there with a higher batting average. We have to make money. We have seniors. These are old people. I have to get this. You have to get this done for us. We hope you do. We will do everything we can. The bottom line is, we want to get this thing solved. And please, work toward that progress. I'm with you because I want us to win. But when we are not meeting the obligation, I mean, what's the point of it? We have to meet the obligation or more. So we have to set our sights higher. If we fall down here, we might be where we need to be. We have to generate change, positive change here. If the board's the problem, we have to go there. I don't care what we do. But this is about the quality of life.
Are you finished? Because I'll recognize Shannon.
Mr. Birnbaum, one last question. Our portfolio and performance versus similar peers in our category, how are we doing?
Very well.
I think since we took over, we look like everybody else. We are not too risky. We are not too conservative. The results we get are similar to what everyone else is generating in the public fund realm. And if I, Mr. Mayor, might address Councilman Battle's comments. I get it. This fund exists because we've had police officers and firemen who have worked their entire lives, and in many cases put their lives on the line for the citizens of this city. And we have to make sure that we provide a secure retirement
For
for
the
them.
next 100 years.
And we also have to answer to the taxpayers. So we can swing for the fences. We can generate higher returns, but with that comes higher risk.
That's right.
And that means that the downside of risk is higher contributions from the city. And that's true here, it's true in the state of Illinois, it's true in the state of Virginia.
There are hill staying sure shot investments in this market that will stand the test of time. There's been several new products or new investments that have come on the market in the last 3 or 4 years that have made people like you and me money. And really, when we're talking about the city, I don't care what Norfolk made. I don't care what Richmond made. That's irrelevant. I care about what we make, and because they lose money, that don't make it right for me.
I agree.
I'm gonna make money.
I agree. And we have.
Yes.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir, for a very comprehensive presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Ashby.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. I returned tonight to address an issue that Council asked several questions back maybe about a month or so ago as it relates to the procurement process. And so tonight, I'm going to briefly touch on the tenets of procurement as it relates to public bodies in the Commonwealth of Virginia. First, all procurement is governed from a state perspective by the Virginia Public Procurement Act, code section beginning with 2.2, 4300 of the Code of Virginia. And its purpose is to make certain that public bodies obtain high-quality goods and services at a reasonable cost, and that all procurement procedures are conducted in a fair and impartial manner. With an avoidance of any impropriety or appearance of impropriety, so that all vendors have an opportunity to access public business. When we discuss the Public Procurement Act, and as it has been enforced in the Commonwealth of Virginia over years, legal commentators have been very astute in explaining that the Public Procurement Act doesn't simply apply to one's purchasing department, but in fact applies to all those employees and agencies who use goods, services, or who are involved in the construction and the process. In addition, local bodies, to the extent that they have any approval or disapproval in a procurement process, are also considered one of the individuals that falls under the umbrella and the regulation of the Public Procurement Act. When we talk about the city of Portsmouth, we're talking about City Code Section 12174, the establishment of the purchasing system and the designation of the purchasing administrator. The city code is designed in such a fashion that all procurement moves through and goes through the purchasing administrator, who is currently Mr. Michael Ammons. In some respects, if there's an absence of a purchasing administrator, the city manager can make another designation, but again, those individuals are the apex of the purchasing system with the supervision of the chief financial officer. Portsmouth is not unique in that process. Many of the localities have a similar structure. Here are the six of the local municipalities around us. Each has a purchasing officer, sometimes termed a purchasing agent or a procurement administrator, but they all have similar code sections and similar structure, again, with procurement moving through and being conducted by that one individual employee. As I said before, part of the Procurement Act discusses and sets out parameters as it relates to the appearance of public procurement and the appearance of impropriety. They set out limitations and obligations on behalf of all folks involved in procurement. One of the things that is common to that process that comes up on a rare occasion is the fact that the statute sets forth some prohibitions as it relates to elected and appointed individuals, such that when or if there were ever a contract consummated outside of the parameters and the understanding of the Procurement Act, essentially the law provides that that contract would be void.
So it's a seller beware situation.
Correct. And the buyer beware. Well, I say buyer meaning the vendor would be
Which is the
taking
seller.
on the risk. Correct.
Can you explain that a little different?
What it provides is there is a structure to the procurement process. It goes through the Office of Procurement. Were there ever a contract consummated by an elected or appointed official outside of the city's process, that contract would essentially be void. That individual could not, and it could be voided subsequent to activities. So there is a common structure, a consistent structure through which procurement flows through. Not only is there a structure, but there's also a Division 5 of our city code and a similar division in the Commonwealth of Virginia that speaks to ethics in procurement. Many of you are probably familiar with the fact that when we talk about ethics in public government, we're talking about everything from what we call common street bribery or graft, but also should you enter into business with someone who's related to you that has an interest in business. You can't necessarily do business with your spouse's company and those sorts of things. And we talk about businesses with interests, folks where you may have an interest or some family member may have an interest. One of the probably most strict provisions of public procurement is the fact that public procurement provides, as it relates to penalties for violation on the ethics front, as it says here at the end, in addition to any fine or penalty, if an employee is found to have violated these laws, they essentially sacrifice their jobs. And so when we talk about procurement, one of the reasons you'll see such fervor in trying to keep those processes, I'll call it pristine, is because one, from a staff standpoint, it is your employment that's at issue, as well as the public trust in terms of the procurement and how we proceed.
Any questions? Bill?
Well, I guess the question is that most of us at this table are aware there's been talk that the MOU on the agenda tonight be tabled. Is that allowed or not allowed under the law?
Certainly, the issue before City Council is the setting aside of funds as it relates to one element of consideration in a procurement process. Certainly, City Council has oversight over the appropriation of funds, so that is a little distinct issue. That particular issue does not necessarily invade what we would call the arena of procurement. While it might make some choices or limit some choices that can be done, it does not direct the rest of procurement as it's set up tonight. So certainly the City Council always has the purse in some respects. So that line is not necessarily blurred. The question becomes when you get into the actual nitty-gritty of the procurement process.
Well, there's parts of that process that have already been proposed that are in the process. So if this body, which is not part of the committee that this council agreed upon, if this council changes any portion of that proposal, are we still within the law?
You are, to the extent that that issue is sort of off the table. It's a negotiating point that would be off the table. But that is certainly within your parameters to do so. It wouldn't necessarily, the process can move forward on other options, other considerations. That particular piece would not be there, but they could move forward on the rest of the options available under the PPA process that's going forward.
So we do have the authority to
Address the matter before us tonight.
to literally change the agreement, the elements within the agreement?
No, let me be clear. What's before you is an issue of appropriation on a matter that's in the discussion.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
About the financial piece. I'm talking about the, well, what brought this up was the location that the proposal contains. Can this body change the location and still be within the parameters of the law?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, I think you as a body can consider other locations. Whether or not that affects this process, which is ongoing, is a different matter. But you certainly always have the opportunity to investigate that for this process or some other process. But it will be sort of separate tracks. You all will be considering issues for the benefit of the city, but not as part of the PPEA.
Paul?
Do we have the authority to do an executive review of procurement systems that have been processed at the city manager level and the outcome has been reached? Do we have the authority to review those bids and that process?
I don't get involved in it.
Councilman Battle, what typically occurs is if someone is aware or believes there may have been improprieties in some procurement process, that would be subject to review within the purchasing department, not the city council. It wouldn't be reviewed by the city council. You may get a report, we've looked into it, it is approved, it's fine, whatever, but you will not get a procurement file.
But we can't commit the city's money, large sums of money. I know we do it now, but I'm saying, since we are committing large sums of the city's money, this provision doesn't allow us to review that process within this body.
you all have given that
Committee.
responsibility as it relates to the PPEA to a staff committee. Your city code gives that responsibility to the department and whoever the evaluators are. We do it every day. That happens every day. Every road project, every water project, those things are done with an assemblage put together within the purchasing department. Those proposals are evaluated. We do have challenges. Folks, bidders come in and challenge every day. We address those challenges. Some of them are handled in purchasing. Some come to my office if they're moved beyond the process available. So they're handled within that construct, which is consistent across the Commonwealth of Virginia.
In the past, I always was with the management group that reviewed large sums of monies that have been approved through the procurement process, but when it came to the governing bodies that I dealt with, government and private, we were allowed to examine, review, and make decisions above or where there have been errors or improprieties.
I want to recognize Dr. Pat.
One of the things I was going to say to council is, with the committee that you set, the city manager is not a part of that committee. So I'm not in the meetings. You want me to finish, Mayor?
May finish.
Okay. I'm not in the meetings. The committee that you have appointed is the committee. I do not get involved in procurement, the contracts, the whatever, any of that. By law, I cannot. That's why you have the officers.
So,
go ahead. Elizabeth and then Lisa.
Solomon, I think it's somewhat confusing in that we all see, for example, the school board take actions on contracts when they sit in this very room. We see the Redevelopment Housing Authority take action on contracts,
Many times.
which is contrary to what the city council can and does do. Is that?
That is correct. And even the SIPSA board has certain authorities where matters go into a committee, a subset of the group, or whatnot. But again, those are by ordinance and structure. Some would say, some folks may be stretching the reading of their statutes and ordinances in order to comply with this. What's clear for city council is, as you know, with regard to everything, you have the city council, you have a city manager, you have a CFO, and you have a purchasing department below. So that is significantly far below. You're not approving, you approve dollars for larger budget items, and then the money is dispensed in accordance with the law below. So there is quite a bit of difference and distance between city council decisions and those other organizations. Structurally, they may be structurally different at certain amounts. More often than not, approving a contractual dollar amount for a contract as opposed to approving the contract.
For ABC Corporation to do.
And typically, that's where you get the fuzz. You're supposed to, the PRHA board is supposed to approve a dollar amount for this contract. The question is, are they supposed to delve into the ins and outs of the contract, or just simply say, we're moving $30,000 over here to accomplish this objective? It gets a little fuzzy when you start trying to peel back the agreement
Lisa
and delve into the agreement.
Next, okay.
Okay, so in reference to the resolution that we are looking at tonight, in reference to the PPEA, what we're saying is that we don't have the legal authority to buy time on this. This vote has to go forward tonight, and there is no stipulations for us to delay the vote, which was my comment at the end of the public hearing last night. So not saying that we don't want to move forward. We just want more time to take a look at it. So there's no provisions that would allow us as council members to wait another week or another council meeting before we make a decision on moving forward with this.
Vice Mayor, the issue before council tonight is the set aside of the funding for that contingency fund. That's all. You all can address that in whatever fashion you see. The rest of the process is over here, and we'll march on in accordance with your rules. You all are free to deal with that appropriation
There's really
issue
nothing for us to review.
and whatever.
Right. We could buy all the time we want, but but we can't sit here and go, oh, this is the contract, and
No,
is
you
that?
can't.
No, not asking for the contract,
Yeah.
but we got a lot of comments from citizens last night that we, their understanding of us moving forward with the resolution to move $475,000 from one fund and set it, earmark it, benchmark it, whatever we want to call it, for the use for the PPEA to move forward with the blueprint plans or the constructional plans or whatever we want to call it at this point. That is our concern. So whether we vote up or down or table or do nothing, that process is still going forward. So public, is that my understanding?
It can only move forward in accordance with whatever you all decide with regard to the money. If you table it, that issue won't be out there.
All right.
It won't be out there.
And that's
So that we,
non-fundables. We would say
so that we can have a full-throated discussion
whether
on
we
this.
go or not.
So that we can have a full-throated discussion on this. I sent everybody on council an email recommending that we table this item. If I understood the city attorney correctly, that's within our purview to do. And
Doesn't stop
I,
the
for
project.
one, am not ready to vote on the ordinance tonight as it is written. He says that this is an appropriation ordinance, and it's certainly within our purview to table this motion.
Right.
And so maybe it might be good to take a consensus of where we are on that so we can move forward in this presentation. Are you for tabling,
Yes, I'm for tabling.
Nate?
Yes.
Yes.
What are we tabling?
We're tabling the consideration of the ordinance.
I heard the attorney say that the business before us is a financial decision on
The
the money.
project still goes forward.
Are we tabling the project? Which is,
Not the
Not, that's not
Not
in
the
our,
project.
it's not up to us.
you know, if we don't like this thing, we can make an easy decision to just nix it.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think
There may be some others that
that's
like
very
that.
encouraging.
Yeah, let's get on down the road to something more important. I mean, we got a portside tent to deal with,
Yes.
and a lot of other things of a higher importance. So why don't you call for consensus to nix the deal?
All right, wait a minute, let's finish where we are. Are you for it or against it?
I'm for, let's put other options on the table.
Okay. Paul?
Nix it.
I think your question was tabling the
The consider-
appropriation motion and
Yes.
maybe reviewing that.
Yes.
And I would agree for that.
Yes.
All right, so
Table the motion.
we have a majority, and so we need, when we get to this point on the agenda tonight, we need someone to make a motion to table.
And that would
It
be
was
me,
second.
because I probably didn't know how to say it last night, but that was what I was requesting.
And be prepared that a motion to table is a motion that has no discussion. And so if you feel you've got angst about this, let's hear it now, because once the motion is made and seconded, we vote it up or down.
But my point is that, if we're just kicking the ball down the field, we don't like this project, obviously, the impact of the citizens resonated with a lot of folks last night. So if you don't like the project, why are you kicking the ball down the field? Let's be upright about it and say we don't like the deal, period.
We don't have a deal.
I don't like the deal, period.
We don't have a
Well,
deal.
as a matter of clarity, do we have a deal?
No, we don't. We're in the process
No,
of
no,
negotiation.
we're still operating.
Well, that's what I was going to address.
Thank
Look, we were very clear last night. We don't have a contractual obligation at this point. We entered into a memorandum of understanding with some conditions and parameters. The process, as I understand it, will continue down the road. What I heard last night were people, and I'm glad that the citizens did come forward to voice their concerns about how we were approaching the process, what their input was in terms of the location of the new city hall. And I think as responsible leaders, it is to our advantage to hear our community and to sit back and obtain the necessary information from all points of view that we can to make an informed decision in moving forward. Look, kicking the can down the road is not an option. The reality is we've got to make a decision, and we were elected to make a decision. So we've got to work together as a team, as a body, to come to a conclusion that we can all be in agreement with.
And
Well,
take
you know,
it.
I'm glad I heard you say that, because I mentioned that kicking the ball down the field, the can down the road, whatever you want to say. I wanted to flush out whether we really want this thing or not.
We don't have anything to argue
Because
with.
last night, some of you speaking in front of the audience seemed to not want it. Seemed to question the integrity of the people proposing it. And by the way, the public-private partnership, the tunnel had nothing to do with that.
Right.
That wasn't
City.
anything that this council or this city did.
No.
There is an example of a couple examples of public-private partnerships. One with the same company, and that's the Renaissance Hotel.
Okay.
And believe it or not, that was not met with unanimous vote or consent from the public. We heard a lot of comments, and we appreciated the input. As I recall, some of the suggestions were probably incorporated within the project. And also the courthouse, the new courthouse, was a public-private partnership. And that also didn't have 100% approval. But both projects are still brought up in a positive note as well as a negative note. But this project, if we're going to wait for 100% approval, it won't happen. If we're looking for a project that's going to please everybody in the city, it'll probably be the ugliest thing that you ever saw in your life, because there is no such project that will please everybody. So my point, I was being very facetious when I said, do we want this project? But I'm glad to hear that you do support it, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, I've got the floor, gentlemen and ladies, okay?
Good.
I think we're using broad definitions of public-private partnerships. When you put money into it as a municipal government, it becomes a partnership. But it may not fit the parameters of the partnership as defined under this particular section of the Procurement Act. What we're talking about are two public buildings that will last for half of a century. And the citizens look to us to make a right decision on location. Location's going to drive the cost. It's a major cost driver. And you fool yourself if we don't see that. If we pick a site where you can have at-grade parking, then the cost of structured parking goes away. So I think being careful and thoughtful about making a decision that's going to impact the city for the next half century is our responsibility. We've got to do that. And so when we get to this point on the agenda, if someone will make a motion to table, we'll have a second, and then we'll go to the vote. Okay?
Good.
All right, let's
Go on, Ashley.
Go ahead.
First of all, I want to go back to Mr. Attorney.
Okay.
Mr. Attorney, will you check with the Attorney General to see if the City Council has the authority
Can't do that.
to do the things that I mentioned in reference to the procurement system and get back with us with an answer. Will you, sir?
If that's the consensus with council.
No.
All right, let's take a consensus. We'll start with Elizabeth.
Let me also just provide you some information.
Well,
The
sir,
A-
you
the
don't
A-
have to do it. I'll do it.
No,
The
the-
council don't have to do
The
it.
AG's office generally takes about 6 months minimum to respond.
Well, I got a back door in, so I'll do it. Let me do it.
Okay. Let's proceed with your discussion, with your presentation.
Let me speak a little bit about the PPEA, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to hit some of the higher points. You all have had a bit of a discussion, but just for the time frame, of course, this process began with the first notice back in May of 2018. The notices were put out. Certainly, we had some milestones that we met in May of 2018 with regard to this process. I believe February 26th of 2018 is when Dr. Patton came before this body to address negotiations, the beginning of negotiations with Armada Hoffler. And in November 27th of 2018, City Council approved item 18447, approving the city staff evaluation team for the PPA proposal. I want to spend a little bit of time just so everyone is.
Hold on, Paul's asking for the floor.
Why are we doing this? We know this. This is just a history of how far we've come.
Let's go through, understand, he may have something at the end, so let's hear his presentation.
Let me address that. Several weeks ago, there was a question. As a matter of fact, I believe you had several questions with regard to procurement. Council asked for a briefing on the procurement process. That's why we're here today. One of the issues, the evaluation factors for the staff committee, because there's been some discussion and other questions by council about when issues of financing and those sorts of things are coming up. Those are factors that are going to be evaluated by the committee. The purpose tonight is to refresh and perhaps advise some council members of what those issues are, qualifications and experience, project characteristics, the project financing, its compatibility with regard to city plans as well as economic development efforts. There was considerable question about the cost of the project. That's also a factor in the general consideration, as well as issues of design, which you all have seen some thus far. And so once again, as we have talked about before, once those issues are digested by the committee, they're going to bring those issues back before City Council on one of two occasions in terms of addressing interim and complete agreements with more detail for council to evaluate and then respond thereto.
And advise.
Any other questions?
Any other
Yes,
questions?
yes.
Lisa?
Okay, so we got an unsolicited proposal, and because we had an unsolicited proposal, we had to open up for 30 days for another developer or RFP, whatever, somebody to come in and say that I can do it too.
45.
Correct.
So we had
45 days
two-
minimum.
45 days. So we had two, and then they both withdrew?
One withdrew.
One withdrew. So was that vendor known to?
No, we had one, and then that one withdrew.
No.
I just
Right,
wanted
that's
to
not
get the record straight. She didn't know.
Yeah, so we had
Just
one,
one.
just one, right.
Say that again, Mr. Battle. Tell me
What
what
are you saying?
There was one other company that put in a bid, and then they withdrew
That's
their
what she
bid.
said. That's what she
Right.
said.
She said it was two.
I thought it was two, but it was just one. Okay.
Well, it was two at one time.
she
It was
correct.
two.
Count that one word.
Two. It was
Well,
two.
Yeah, so Armada, and then one other, but we never knew who the other, I mean, that's not public knowledge.
No.
Okay.
The individual is not public knowledge because in any procurement process, if the process collapses, everyone, somebody may decide
be
to bring it
protected.
back again, and so
Right.
you don't divulge
who they are.
essentially information and the details of it, because it may come back again in some other life. We don't do that with any procurement.
So then, after the other vendor withdrew, then we decided to just go into a memorandum of understanding in 2018 with Armada Hoffler.
Correct.
To start this process, just.
And then how did the PPA agree, how did they introduce that as, because I know that we don't have the funds to just go and build a new city hall. We're going to have to look for financial options somewhere. So we look for the PPA, they introduced it as part of their deal. How did PPA get in?
It's we define it and talk about unsolicited, they bring it to us. We don't ask, they bring it to
They
us.
bring everything to us.
That's the PPA.
Put this proposal on the table.
And then all of these issues are part of the discussion, including finance.
Which we're
And
not
then they
there
came
yet.
up with 475 too?
That was a discussion with the committee in terms of what the cost would be for the plans. And let me explain that piece.
They didn't come up with that.
One of the issues with regard to whenever the city has a construction contract. If you have a construction contract with a builder or whomever, and that process, for whatever reason, doesn't come to completion, many times the planning department gets calls because builder A is trying to build with plans from architect B. There's a copyright associated with those plans. If you don't own them, you can't build to them. And so the issue with regard to this reserve fund was such that we would not have that sort of issue going forward. We would own the plans as a city, and then we could use those plans at whatever point in time and process. That would preclude some sort of situation where you put in a certain amount of effort and have nothing to show in terms of tangibles to show.
Okay.
And our input goes into the plans? or do they just present something based on their architectural knowledge and expertise?
If you look at the memorandum of understanding, we gave needs assessments, an evaluation of generally what the needs were. We covered all the departments,
and all of that.
square footage and that sort of thing. And so all of that was built into the discussion going forward in terms of what the needs would be in general, and that's part of that discussion.
Finish your question.
Yes.
But we wouldn't want and wouldn't have any need for their plans. If they're not doing the job, what do we want them to do the plans for?
I'm assuming that's rhetorical, Mr. Bell.
No, let me say that again. If they're not gonna do the project, why would we need the plans? Again, let me be rhetorical with you by telling you we can get the same plans for $20,000 to $30,000 that you want to pay $500,000 for. Mr. Solomon,
Okay, let's,
we would have no need for those plans.
okay, Bill. Paul, Bill's got the floor.
Well, on that point, I'm somewhat in agreement with Councilman Battle. If you recall at the work session a couple of weeks ago, I asked if that, either the cost or the availability of the plans is negotiable. And that's something I would think the committee could certainly bring up. I think his point is a valid point. If we don't end up going with Armada Hoffler, it's highly unlikely you're going to carry one developer's plans to another developer, and they're going to want to build to those plans because they have their own architectural
Companies and.
people. So I agree with that.
Well, let me enlighten everybody. And someone mentioned the Suffolk City Hall. They started off with one firm that did 30% drawings. A second firm picked up from there and took it to 100%. So it happens, Bill. It happens.
Well, I'm sure it happens,
No,
but
it happens more frequently.
but everything's negotiable.
Don't disagree.
They didn't set that amount.
That gives, with tabling this motion, it gives everybody a chance that's working on this to
Come back.
try to negotiate that and come back to us.
Come back.
Elizabeth, you asked for the floor.
I'm astounded that we are having all this conversation about a $475,000 reserve fund
That we're not going to use.
for weeks now on a project that we agreed we wanted to discuss that's probably $50 million plus. And we're going to have many opportunities along the way to say yes and no. Nothing's going to ever get built if we don't approve the financing for these buildings. And let's face it, we've got a police department that's basically homeless. We've got a fire department that's in a rented building. And we're sitting in a city hall building that is 50-plus years old and needs to be replaced. So we got to do something. And I'm very proud of the fact that we made these decisions to take these buildings off the waterfront. And I think it's wonderful, and I heard some things last night I certainly hadn't thought of about, do we want, these specific buildings together or separate or downtown or midtown or Churchland or wherever. But we got lots of time for those conversations. That's what, we're getting the big bucks for. Is that yes or no down the road when we're talking about the millions and millions and millions of dollars? This is a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of this.
If we're tabling it,
Well-
you supported that.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've had a full discussion.
Yes.
Can we move on?
Please.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to bring that one back up.
All right. We'll move on then. Are we at city manager report?
Yes, sir. Mayor, I will, we've already discussed 19-312. I'll move to 4 others. Tonight on the city manager's report, we have FY 2020 mental health outpatient funding, adoption of an ordinance accepting funding in the amount of $32,250 from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, and appropriating said sum in the FY 2020 Behavioral Health Care Services Fund for use by the Portsmouth Department of Behavioral Health Care for mental health outpatient services. We have 19-329, FY20 Community Corrections Pretrial Service Program additional funding. Adoption of an ordinance accepting a grant in the amount of $10,081 from the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services and appropriating said funds in the FY 2020 Grants Fund to provide funding to operate local probation and pretrial services in the city of Portsmouth. We have 19-330, adoption of an ordinance accepting a grant in the amount of $330,296.78 from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and appropriating said amount in the FY 2020 Grants Fund from use by the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism for the USDA Summer Program Services Program. And I would like to note that the Summer Food Service Program in the city of Portsmouth is one of the oldest in the region. It is 35 years old. It's one of the first in the state. The last is item number 19-331, the issuance of revenue bonds for capital improvement program, adoption of an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of revenue bonds by the city of Portsmouth, Virginia, and establishing the terms, details, and provisions for the payment thereof, water and sewer system revenue bonds, total principal not to exceed $36,800,000. Those are the items that are before you tonight for the city manager's report. I have 2 report back items. The first, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, you have previously discussed the one-time bonus for retirees in the Portsmouth Supplemental and Portsmouth Fire and Police retirement systems. This evening, I put forth for your consideration the payment of $600 to 1,077 participants. The total cost of this payment is $646,600. In the original FY 2019 budget, City Council, you appropriated $5.7 million use of fund balance, of which during the 2019 budget, we only used $3.8 million expended, thereby leaving $1.9 million of unused fund balance in the FY 2019 appropriation. With your concurrence, I will ask staff to prepare and bring back during the next City Council meeting, which is September 24th, 2019, this matter for your approval under the City Manager's report. The unassigned fund balance will remain as planned in the fiscal year 19 budget at $46.7 million.
Okay. Let's go see where we are.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Okay. Bring it back.
And Mayor, I did have one comment to make in regards to the retirement fund as the liaison to the retirement board. We have this discussion. Well, this is my first year in the discussion, but I've heard historically we continue to have this discussion. And after being on the board and understanding what our fiduciary responsibilities are and our liabilities that we have going forward, I would just ask, and I understand all of the details that is involved with this, but I recommend that we ask our city attorney to draft language that will produce a resolution to allow us to focus on improving our retirement system and pension fund without financial requests that will threaten the financial solvency going forward.
Yeah. We've all said that.
Right.
And I think we have unanimous consent for that. So put that in the instrument that you bring back.
Yes.
All right.
I have one more, Mayor. On the report backs, Council, you asked staff to present draft of the ordinance for the next public work session that is to be adopted on the Regional Broadband Authority. I'd like to report to you that our Chief Information Officer working with the City Clerk, there will be a public hearing notice and resolution advertisement to be publicly circulated on September the 15th and October 20th, with the public hearing held on Tuesday, October 22nd at 7 p.m. City Council Chamber. You will receive in your box what you requested, the advertisement and the notice of the public hearing and what the resolution, and the City Clerk will get that in your budget.
And this is the public hearing on the creation of the authority.
Yes, on the authority.
Every city is doing that.
That's right. And it is, I also have information, Portsmouth has provided their representation board members' names, and council confirmed at our last meeting. Chesapeake has provided their names, but they have yet to be confirmed, and they are to be confirmed by the city council tonight. So everybody else has moved through the process.
that
I've
your report,
completed.
right?
Yes.
The Virginia Municipal League Annual Conference this year is 6 October through 8 October in Roanoke. 4 of us have decided or intended to go. It's a very important conference. Not only do you learn things, but it's the preparation for the 2020 session. With that, the city clerk, if I may use your position, has suggested that we cancel the Monday night meeting and the Tuesday night meeting. What is the pleasure of council? We've done this before for this very event.
Yeah, for this event.
We don't have a form, so
Are you for that?
Until
I agree.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, rather
Yes.
cancel
Yeah.
it than
Yeah.
reschedule.
Okay, so we'll put that we need a motion to do that, and we'll have a motion on the agenda under items submitted by council to add it to the agenda. At that point, once a motion passes, our policy allows people to speak. I'll invite anybody in the audience, if they want to speak on the matter, to come forward.
Are we only canceling the 5 o'clock meeting on Tuesday or the whole night?
The
Whole night.
Okay, because our meetings in Roanoke don't end till like 3 or 4 o'clock.
That's right,
So
you won't
that's
be
good.
back, right?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Very good, Jesus.
So that's Monday and Tuesday.
Monday and
Yes.
Tuesday. All right. City council liaison reports. We do need a closed session. Elizabeth?
Real quick, just to let the public know, the Economic Development Authority and Portsmouth Port and Industrial Commission will have a joint meeting together on next Tuesday, the 17th of September at 8 a.m. in this room. It's their quarterly joint meeting.
Paul? Anything? Do you have anything?
No.
Bill?
No.
Shannon?
I just wanted to announce we have a retirement board meeting, I believe, this Thursday. Anyone certainly is welcome to attend if you want to gain some more information and insight on our retirement.
The Legislative Policy Committee of the VML meets Friday. I'm on that committee.
Ashby, looking at you.
City Attorney Solomon Ashby is going to up there for the fishing.
Fishing.
For your fishing discussion with VML to gain their support across the state to address some of the issues about the personal information that we all contain and try to put some security to that given the current state of affairs.
And Dr. Patton, Sherry Neal is going.
Yes.
to-
And is Mr. Jones and Daniel Jones also.
Correct.
It's ready for us to go, to consider a motion to go into closed session. Do we have such a
We
motion?
do. I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711, A.1 for discussion of assignment, appointment, or salaries of city council appointees.
Is there a second?
Second.
That's the best way to do it.
Any discussion on the motion? None. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Summers?
Yes.
Mayor Rowe?
Yes, we're in closed session.